Let's see if I can survive analyzing and reviewing a controversial book. I'm going to try because at the very least, this book made me think. There are a lot of reviewers that have said that the author is not too subtle when it comes to making her point. That being said, sometimes when an author chooses not to be subtle, the conclusions to be made are so obvious that at the very least we have something to talk about, analyze, and start a discussion with. Mania by Lionel Shriver starts in an alternative 2011. This book is a satire. In 2011, in the United States, the mental parity movement takes hold. Of course, this is fictional, but this is what the book is following. The mental parity movement says that everyone is equally intelligent and capable at everything, and everyone has exactly the same ability to contribute to society in any way they choose to. Early on within the book, because it goes from 2011 to 2027, they just start getting rid of saying things like stupid and other words that are considered derogatory and also false, because in this world, the idea is that no one is stupid. Everyone is equally intelligent. As time moves on, this goes as far as getting rid of tests and qualifications to do important jobs. Any sort of telling someone that they can't do a particular job or task because they aren't qualified or they don't know enough about what they are doing is basically not allowed, because that is discrimination within the world of the mental parity movement. This is where I should briefly mention that the author of this novel is a somewhat politically controversial figure. From what I could see online, Lionel Shriver has called herself a Democrat for many years, but also has endorsed some Republican candidates in recent years. Basically, she's what you would consider an American moderate with very strong opinions. I think sometimes when we think of moderates, we think that they just have lukewarm opinions, but sometimes when it comes to the case of Lionel Shriver, if you're a moderate, you can have some pretty out there opinions that a lot of people don't agree with and a lot of people don't like, and that's kind of the case with her. I will say I don't line up with the author perfectly politically, and I normally wouldn't talk about politics on a booktube channel, except this book is very political adjacent. So I'm just going to let you know, I chose to read her book because I like exploring lots of ideas. By choosing to read her book, I am not saying I agree with all of her political ideologies outside of this book. We're going to analyze the book for what it is. We are going to get into some really interesting specifics in a second, because I think what she masterfully did in this book was choose her characters to fit what she is trying to say with this book. So we're going to talk about some of those details. Later on, I'm going to talk about my own opinion on the issue she raises. First, though, I want to say that there are a lot of reviewers who don't like this book. This is a very controversial book. It's a book where you see most reviews are either 5 stars because they agree with what she has to say, and then there's also a ton of reviews that are 1 stars because they think that what she's bringing up is just not super relevant and that she's kind of just trying to make a problem out of nothing. One review on Goodreads said this book is, I don't really feel like cussing, effing stupid. Okay, now that I've gotten the initial obvious joke off my chest, this is the kind of book written by a well-off, educated white woman whose life problems have never been about her ability or her economic situation or whether other people perceive her as human. And in the midst of this relative comfort, she's somehow gotten it in her head that being persecuted is glamorous and desirable and is therefore desperate to be oppressed. Unfortunately, the only attributes she has are desirable ones, so she invents a whole imaginary world where nobody likes that stuff and it doesn't get you respect or make life easier. She also doesn't know this is what she's doing. She thinks she's sticking it to the man. If you asked her, she'd say, of course she doesn't want to be oppressed. Oppression is bad. Just see what it would look like if it happened to smart people like me. But she's telling on herself, too bad you can't get oppressed for being boorish and self-absorbed. We will circle back to this Goodreads review and critique after I tell you a little bit about the book so that we can discuss if this book was actually published in a timely moment when it is needed, or if this author is just sort of creating a problem where a problem doesn't exist. But first, let's start by unpacking some of the relationships she chose in this book, and I'm going to discuss why those choices were so interesting. From this point on, this is not a spoiler-free review. We are going to get into the details of what she includes in her book to make her point more clear with this concept of the mental parity movement. So if you want to read this book soon, you can skip this. I will say, I would totally watch if I wasn't planning on reading this book soon, because there's a lot of interesting things that we can talk about as far as intelligence and society. Two best friends. The main character of this book is named Pearson. Pearson is an English professor who is married and has 3 children. Pearson's best friend, Emory, is a journalist, and she specializes specifically in opinion pieces. The difference between Pearson, the English professor mother of 3, and her popular best friend, Emory, who ends up becoming a huge public voice, is one that is so interesting for what the author is trying to do with this book. From early on, we know Emory, the journalist, is actually smarter than Pearson, the English professor. However, Emory is more flexible with her ideas. She is willing to join the mental parity movement because she wants to be part of the group that is currently in power ideologically. So she quickly shifts her perspective. Even though she has an elite education and has a background that gives her a huge advantage for intelligence being a thing, Emory chooses to go along with the mental parity movement and actually becomes a mouthpiece for it, telling people that they should not believe in the idea of intelligence. On the other hand, Pearson, the main character English professor, is more stubborn. She's not willing to go along with it, and she has a little bit of a tiny resistance, especially within her home and her family and in her personal life, and how she talks about this movement. Just to show how Emory, the journalist, is into this, I'm going to go ahead and read you a quote from one of her opinion pieces that she shares verbally online. She's basically, I think it's like an NPR person is what she is. She says, "Ever since the mental parity movement roiled out backward institutions and finally issued an fairer, more decent, more respectful public protocol, we've all recognized that a host of snubs and put-downs have grown unacceptable. We know what those words are and how savagely they've been used in the past to disparage and dehumanize. But all social progress is doomed to be halting. After our one step forward, too many of our contemporaries are shuffling 2 steps back." This opinion piece is one that really starts to shift the book, because Emory, in her statements to the public, begins to say things like, we can no longer just avoid terms like stupid. We have to basically avoid the meaning behind it. So everyone has to start being very careful in how they speak, because even if it's implied that you think someone's not capable at doing a particular task, you are discriminating. The book presents Emory as a character who will change with the tide every time. When one thing is popular, she will immediately jump on the bandwagon, and then when another thing is popular, she will completely flip or swing with the pendulum. While the mental parity movement is popular, she is its key voice. Because she is so good at being charismatic, she is the mouthpiece for a movement that wouldn't even recognize her ability to be a good mouthpiece. Later on in the book, when this eventually all falls apart, she is praised for her intelligence. And no matter where society goes on this spectrum of believing in intelligence or not believing in intelligence, Emory is right there doing what most people are doing. She constantly changes, and she also constantly wins. In contrast, Pearson is very stubborn. The book gives us a reason for Pearson's stubbornness. Pearson is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. We follow her for a few chapters in her life when she was a teenager or even a kid. In these backstory chapters, we see that her parents forced her to knock on doors and talk about Jehovah's Witness things. We see that she wasn't allowed to celebrate birthdays. She wasn't allowed to celebrate holidays. She had to oftentimes recite back the acceptable opinions for her community and she had to spend a lot of time reading the scriptures and couldn't basically have any friends outside of her Jehovah's Witness community. She never feels her mother's love, and her mother never allows her to have any individuality or freedom. About her upbringing, Pearson says, "I've characterized the religion as joyless, but that's not quite true. For witnesses, joylessness is itself a joy. Ceaselessly celebrating your perfect absence of celebration resembles a year-long party, and ruining other people's fun is a form of fun. In which case, throughout my childhood, my mother had a high old time." This background becomes an essential part of the story within the book. Pearson, when she was a teenager, left her religion because her mom said that she would be pulling her out of high school. If you are unaware, and I don't mean to offend anyone here, but if you are unaware, the Jehovah's Witness religion is the least educated Christian religion within the United States, meaning that they don't really value it. So basically, Pearson was only going to school because it was mandated by the government, and as soon as that mandate lifted, her mom planned to pull her out of school before she could get her diploma. Pearson, at that point, rebels, leaves her family, leaves her religion behind, which is a really big deal because if you are unaware, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a practice of shunning. Her family never talks to her again, and as a teenager, for finishing out high school, she actually moves in with Emory and Emory's very educated parents. The message is very clear because Pearson has a background of not fitting in and being weird. When she was a Jehovah's Witness as a child and into her teenage years, she definitely didn't fit in because she was forced to not basically engage with anyone or anything fun or have friends that were outside of her community. Once she left, she didn't get to fit in with her family or the community she left behind because they shunned her. So we get this character who is not used to going with everyone else. She's always had this background of standing out, and because of that, she is not willing to go along with the idea of mental parity and forget that intelligence is a real thing. Even though Pearson is considered the less intelligent of the two best friends, she is never able to go along with it like Emory does because it feels too similar to the feeling of control that she left behind when she left her high-demand religion. She kind of has this attitude of she's never going to go back to a situation where she is told what to think and what to do. And the political movement that takes hold in this book ends up feeling very similar to the one she left behind when she left the religion. It's almost as if the author might be making the point that the person who is able to stand up against something that they disagree with when other people tend to agree with it or at least go along with it is generally a person who already has practice doing so. People who have always seen normal and impressive by society's standards, like Emory, have a harder time forming their own opinions when they are used to having a lot of praise and a lot of people like them. However, the author seems to imply that selfishly switching sides every few years, like Emory does make you more successful than standing your ground. Emory, by the end of the book, is a lot more successful once again than Pearson. Academia versus blue-collar work. Another relationship in this book is very central to the points that the author seems to be trying to make. Pearson, the English professor, is married to Wade, who is described as a tree surgeon. Basically, he goes up and trims trees, ones that are like really tall, and it's a dangerous activity. Wade is described as having strong physical intelligence. He knows how to fix things, he knows how to get things done, and he knows how to be safe while doing so. Although he himself is a very capable person, he doesn't want to get involved with politics or anything to do with this culture war, even though it's not really a culture war at this point because within the book, the mental parity movement is clearly winning. The book says about Wade was no toady, but his relationship to authority was avoidant. In his occupational life, he escaped hierarchy by being self-employed. His instinct with the noise of politics was to press the mute button. He didn't engage, he eluded conflict. 5 years my senior, Wade was intensely private. He loved being on his own, he liked silence, he liked the woods, he went online as rarely as he could imagine, he liked cooking and food, he slept aptly like a log. Wade is written to be the character that mental parity shouldn't affect. He is very independent. He is self-employed. He isn't in any sort of like academic sort of field. He's not a professor. He's not a doctor. He's not a lawyer. He is doing his own thing and getting paid for outdoor tree surgeon work. So he isn't supposed to be affected. In contrast, his wife is forced to stare at it every single day. As an English professor, she feels like she's sort of not doing her job because all she does is assign books that no one reads because they don't have to, because everyone's equally intelligent to everyone else, and she can't give tests, and she basically has to pass everyone along. No matter what a student says in a discussion about any topic, she has to praise it as being brilliant because everyone is equally intelligent, and making it seem like you think otherwise on any topic makes you potentially lose your job in this culture. She struggles with this throughout the book constantly, and Wade, being her husband and also helping her take care of the children, constantly asks her to grin and bear it just so that they can keep food on the table, because obviously her income is a big part of their family income. However, Wade actually gets impacted by the effects of the mental parity movement first. He hires an assistant to help him with pruning the trees. Quickly, he discovers that this assistant is not very capable and not very good at the job he hired him to do. Given that for whatever reason in this world, discrimination lawsuits happen a lot more often, especially when anyone is said to be incapable, Wade kind of keeps this assistant on just so he doesn't get in legal trouble, and gives this assistant sort of like jobs that don't matter very much that he can't really harm anyone with. The assistant gets really annoyed, though, and eventually says, no, I want to do what you do, and you can't keep me from doing that. And by Wade keeping certain tasks to only himself, he is implying that he is more capable at the job than the assistant. So he has to sort of let the assistant do it. They go up in some tree, I think. I might not have this perfectly right, because I don't have the type of intelligence Wade has. I can't picture it perfectly. But they go up in this tree, and I believe the assistant cuts the branch that Wade is standing on, and Wade falls and breaks his ankle and I believe his wrist as well, all because the assistant wasn't good at it and was not following safety protocols, but he can't be called out on it. His wife Pearson takes him to the hospital, and when they arrive, the doctor they see is very young. Pearson immediately gets worried because the qualifications to become a doctor in recent years were not very high, meaning there was no tests, there was no MCAT, there was really just nothing in medical school to weed out people who studied versus people who didn't, and everyone is sort of given the certification and ability to become a doctor at the end, regardless of the amount of effort they put in. Wade, coming in for a broken ankle or twisted ankle or something, is actually administered an incorrect drug intravenously, and he almost dies. He basically almost has some sort of cardiac arrest sort of thing. I'm also not an expert when it comes to medicine, so I'd have to reread that part. But what's interesting is that he's actually revived by an older doctor who covers up for the mistake of the younger doctor. About this, Pearson says, well, thank God for the doddering codgers who actually had to pass the MCAT to get into med school. I imagine Dr. Howard could even tell the difference between a femoral artery and a big toe. Because of this mistake and another mistake with the surgery on his foot, Wade is never able to go back to the type of work he loves ever again, and we pretty much get the idea that by the end of the book, he's going to be forced into some sort of office job, even though that doesn't match what he wants and it doesn't match his temperament. The message seems to be that even if you personally desire to opt out of something political, it could still very, very intimately and personally affect you. Mother and daughter. The last relationship I am going to mention from this book is between Pearson and her daughter Lucy. Lucy is Pearson's youngest child, and Pearson consistently says throughout the book that Lucy is likely her less gifted child, meaning Lucy is not as smart as her older two siblings. The older two siblings basically exist to fuel Pearson's anger because she wants the world to be a place that will actually help them realize their dreams by recognizing their intelligence and abilities. Lucy is described as a child of average intelligence, but when the mental parity movement takes hold, Lucy is only 5 or 6. So she is a child of average intelligence within a school system that no longer prioritizes performance. Lucy is young. She is in kindergarten when the mental parity movement picks up, and because of that, she is never taught how to read. She isn't expected to learn how to read or write, and she is constantly told that she is just as smart as anyone else, no matter what she does, what she says. Pearson decides that she can't accept this fate for her daughter. She doesn't want to have a kid who is not able to read just because the kid isn't taught how to read at school. So Pearson begins tutoring sessions one-on-one with her young daughter. She sits her down, they open a book, her kid read to her, and just like anything that you do with a little kid, of course there are some difficulties in getting Lucy to learn how to read. Lucy hates these sessions and doesn't understand why she has to do them because she's already just as intelligent as everyone else. Lucy tells on her mother at school, telling her teachers that her mother makes her sit through these tutoring sessions and forces her to learn how to read, and this sends Child Protective Services to the home. When questioned by Child Protective Services, Pearson tries to defend herself by saying, "Lucy is embellishing somewhat. Our tutorials sometimes last up to 1 hour. I provide snacks. Lucy is free to go to the bathroom whenever she needs to. I'm teaching my daughter how to read. Does the state not regard that as child abuse too?" She is basically told yes. This changes the book a lot. From this moment onward, the person with the most power within the family is Lucy. Before this scene, they kind of talked freely amongst themselves and with their friends, disagreeing with the overall cultural movement that is going forward. When Lucy goes and shows that she could get the family torn apart because Child Protective Services says, "We'll not only take Lucy, we'll take your 2 older children as well," it makes everyone have to be very careful in how they phrase things and what they say so that nothing can ever come back to harm their family. The author is definitely trying to make some points that cultural movements that come across as very strong can impact families. And she kind of makes this a little bit of a joke by making Lucy the de facto head of household. Something that's interesting is the mental parity movement taking hold makes Pearson's home life just as bad as what she experienced as a Jehovah's Witness within the context of a high-demand religion. Back to the Goodreads review. The Goodreads review that I mentioned earlier in the video claims that Shriver made up an imaginary problem and wrote a book as a satire to respond to something that doesn't exist. The reviewer says that as society, we obviously value intelligence, and we obviously value people who are able to achieve goals that are both academic in nature or professional in nature, and that writing a book to make it seem like these people are being discriminated against probably takes away from the fact that other people have problems that are much worse. The reviewer claims in a way that the entire novel is a straw man. Shriver is setting herself up for success by responding to an imaginary problem. I don't completely agree with this viewer, and I'm going to go ahead and give a few of my own opinions. On this channel, I've already criticized the online reading space, even though I love it, saying that everyone is able to post online, everyone has a voice, and by sharing their opinions, it almost feels like everyone's opinion is by default equal. I am definitely not against everyone being involved online, and I am definitely not against everyone getting involved and discussing issues. I think that is very important. But I do think it is interesting when the fact that everyone can now enter the discussion with a low entry of barrier kind of gives us this idea that everyone's opinion should be held to an equal weight, even though I don't actually believe that is the case. This leads to a lot of people making claims that they can't actually support. I've seen a lot of people throw around random vocab terms or buzzwords and think that they've won an argument. One that I sometimes see used well, but sometimes I see it being used as just, I won this argument, is gatekeeping. If you can call someone a gatekeeper, You don't have to back up any of your ideas, and you don't have to make a solid argument because you just won the internet battle. I will never get behind the idea that you can just use a phrase that is really common or a buzzword and win. I don't think I could ever get to the point where I feel that way. I think a lot of people are starting to value the appearance of intelligence or the performance of intelligence. Everyone wants to be seen as a Rory Gilmore, but they don't want to read the actual books that Rory Gilmore reads. And to be fair, on the internet, people have talked about the performance of intelligence to death. I do tend to agree with the idea that we all want to seem intelligent. Even to some extent, I want to seem intelligent when I talk. I have also been a high school teacher within my life, and I will say that not everywhere in the United States is the same, so I don't want to give anyone that impression if they are unaware with how education works within the United States. It's state by state and district by district. In my district, there was this policy called the minimum F, and the way it worked is that you had to give every student a 50% on every assignment, even if they didn't turn the assignment in. The idea was by never having a 0 within the grade book, they would less likely give up on their studies and continue working towards success. In reality, it just meant that no one did any work. Some kids could barely read when they graduated high school, but the high school graduation rate was really high because it was almost impossible to fail these kids. This high graduation rate definitely goes along with liking the idea of intelligence and liking the idea of performance, but not really valuing the actual education. So I don't think that it's completely made up. I do think that everyone values intelligence and they want to seem intelligent and they want to seem smart and they all want to be taken seriously, but that's not necessarily backed up by studying and becoming intelligent. You never want to feel like your opinion on anything, no matter what the subject, is ever by default inferior to someone else's. You want to feel like your contribution is just as good as anyone else's on any topic. I do think that some of our culture is promoting that right now, especially when we think about the internet and having the ability to comment on literally anything. What I say is that we shouldn't necessarily conflate democratic speech with the idea that everyone's opinion is always equal. I think we should be able to share differing values, and I think we should be able to have free speech, but we should also respect some people as being experts within their fields and respect the amount of work it takes to get there. Related to this concept, to some extent, I think we should bring back the concept of humility, understanding what you are really good at and what you're the expert at and what you're not. There are many things that my opinion would not matter as much as someone else's. I know there's many things I do not know and many things that I cannot do, and I feel like I'm trying to remind myself that I shouldn't necessarily put my own opinion first on everything. I should be able to listen to other people, and I should be able to change my mind. Even when I share an opinion and try to back it up with evidence and try to learn about something and try to actually do some research behind what I'm thinking, at the end of the day, I very well could still be wrong. Now, there are definitely some things that I disagree with Shriver on, and some weird choices she made in this book that definitely make it easier for people to dislike her book, because I didn't really get them either. One thing that she does in this book is she really doubles down on the concept that intelligence is hereditary and genetic, especially through like the father. The mom in this book, her first 2 kids are like from a sperm donor who has really high intelligence and I believe is Japanese. And then her 3rd kid is from Wade, her husband, the tree surgeon guy. And the book says over and over and over again that this is the reason why that the older 2 kids are so much smarter than her younger daughter, Lucy. I just feel like I don't know enough about genetics to know if intelligence is inherited to that degree, but I also don't think Lionel Shriver does either, given her background, so doubling down on that so much was kind of weird to me. There were also references to Ivy League schools, kind of talking about how people who were at Ivy League schools and people should see them as being more intelligent, and I tend to have the belief that to get into an Ivy League school often requires connections and privilege more than anything, although of course a lot of people who go there are intelligent. So the idea that we should just believe someone is intelligent just because of their qualification doesn't match my opinion either. I think that we should respect when people are qualified to do something, but then we should also just see how they interact in real life and make a little bit of a judgment for ourselves. I don't know. I feel like I am still forming that opinion. So I disagreed with some of the ways that she framed things, and I don't think if her and I sat down for a conversation, we would agree with everything on intelligence that she sort of tackles in this book. But I do agree with her that it is an issue and it is something that we should have a discussion on, and that it isn't just an entire straw man argument that she made up. I do think it is a problem if we all start thinking we're the experts on everything and we forget who the experts actually are. Thanks for watching.